Then they're not investigating anything in terms of legislation. They're just messing around with Trump world in order to keep him back on his heels, and people who are supportive of him, back on their heels in a run up to 2022 and 2024. This is political opposition research, it looks like. And on top of that, they're trying to jail people who object to this process. Bannon's being prosecuted by the hacks at the Justice Department. I don't know what they're going to do with Meadows. I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled this again and did another indictment. I also want to talk about the development this week with the extraordinary finding of contempt by the House of Representatives against Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff to President Trump. Now, Meadows had cooperated somewhat with the January 6th Rump Committee. I call it the Rump Committee because it's not a real committee. It's a committee of one party. Yes, there are two Republicans on it, but they don't answer to the Republicans. They don't represent the minority party. They're representatives of the majority party, the Democrats in the House. So it's this one committee, one party committee, a Rump Committee that is using January 6th. And I'm really interested in January 6th per se. It's pretty clear what happened there. A lack of security led to a breakdown in security and violence. And will they investigate the U.S. Capitol Police's bungling of the security, or Pelosi's role, or anyone else's role, at least in the House and the Senate, for overseeing security and the security failures that led to the rioting? Because riots happen because of political decisions in terms of policing. That's usually the case. Riots aren't organic in the sense that they're unstoppable by law enforcement. They happen because law enforcement fails, and they usually fail because they're told to fail or told not to do certain things by the politicians running law enforcement. So that being said, you have the January 6th being used as a pretext to target all opposition to the Democratic left in this country. You have Mark Meadows being investigated. Steve Bannon was held in contempt. And they're both making the argument, and Meadows has gone to court to make the argument, that what they're seeking is material that is likely privileged, that the investigation is abusive and violates the rules of the House. I mean, the House has to answer to the rule of law too, believe it or not. So in the case of Meadows, he's in federal court challenging this subpoena, and which is his right as a U.S. citizen. He's held in contempt in the middle of a court challenge by the House. How does that not show you the political nature of what's going on here? And I can tell you that they've expanded the abuse of power to include, potentially 100 people at least, in terms of subpoenas for the phone and text records and email records of all sorts of people whose only crime was to engage in First Amendment protected speech. See, they're not focused on someone who hit a police officer on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. No, they're focused on people who participated in the rally beforehand, which was completely protected by the First Amendment, people objecting to the way the elections were being handled by the states and then by Congress. You have a right to petition your government. You have a right to freedom of speech. And they're targeting people for that. And they're even going back before then for months over issues related to election integrity. If you were involved in litigation, trying to, in the views of those promoting the litigation, to uphold the rule of law when it comes to elections, they're targeting you for doing that. So this is in retaliation for First Amendment protected speech. And I highlighted before how Congress Judicial Watch had, because we went to court to try to get the subpoenas, how Adam Schiff during the first impeachment of Trump took the phone records of Rudy Giuliani, secret subpoena, Giuliani didn't know about it. They got his phone records and published them. And they included the phone records in publishing them of a member of Congress, Devin Nunes, journalists and lawyers for Trump, other lawyers for Trump. So surprise, surprise, they expand the abuse to include individuals engaged in First Amendment protected speech and their families. You know how phone system, where you get a cell phone, you go to family plan, right? So they get everyone's family members involved. Some of these young staffers, it means their parents get dragged into this. Then they're not investigating anything in terms of legislation. They're just messing around with Trump world in order to keep him back on his heels, and people who are supportive of him, back on their heels in a run up to 2022 and 2024. This is political opposition research, it looks like. And on top of that, they're trying to jail people who object to this process. Bannon's being prosecuted by the hacks at the Justice Department. I don't know what they're going to do with Meadows. I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled this again and did another indictment. Others are being forced because of the outrageous conduct of these members of the committee to invoke the Fifth Amendment. They're just trying to come up with something to put someone in jail. Not because they've done anything that's prosecutable under any fair reading of the law. It's politics. These are terrible times for our Republican form of government. We have a Congress that is completely out of control. Brutish in its attack on the rule of law, the Constitution, and the civil liberties of innocent American citizens. Meanwhile, and I want to bring you up to date because I want to go over it with you again, Judicial Watch is actually doing real investigations of January 6th. Judicial Watch exposed, through FOIAs and litigation, for instance, that the federal police, U.S. Park Police, they knew there'd be a big crowd at the Capitol. Obviously, no preparations were made by the Capitol Police or anyone else. Judicial Watch uncovered that Ashley Babbitt was senselessly killed by the U.S. Capitol Police Lieutenant Byrd. There was no good reason. She wasn't armed. We have video showing how dangerous that situation was. He just fired, and there were all sorts of police and others behind her. It's crazy. Judicial Watch uncovered that. Judicial Watch forced the D.C. Office of Medical Examiner through litigation because we wanted to know, where is this autopsy report of Officer Brian Sicknick, who the lying left was saying was killed by rioters, when in fact they knew early on, including in the medical examiner's office, he died of natural causes the next day. And yet they withheld that. And it was only after Judicial Watch sued that they get the information out to us, or to the public generally. So this is the basic investigative work that you would think Congress would be doing if they were serious about this, but they're not. Because Congress is implicated, for instance, in the death of Ashley Babbitt. It was their police force that did it. A needless killing. Where's the investigation into the U.S. Capitol Police about its handling of the January 6th issue? Well, they're not going to do that because who runs the police department in the U.S. Capitol? Nancy Pelosi. Yeah, I know literally she's not running day-to-day operations, but she's the political official who runs the show there. She's Queen of the Hill in that regard. Where are all the videos from January 6th? 14,000 hours of videos we're led to believe. We sued for those records, and Nancy Pelosi's Congress is going to court, telling a court we can't have 1 second of videos under the law. There's a common law right of access to information about the government and to public records. And Nancy Pelosi's police department, the U.S. Capitol Police, have come in and told the court that these aren't, quote, public records. And even if they were, the public interest doesn't require their release. So that 1 second of January 6th videos are being released by Nancy Pelosi, even as she's trying to put people she doesn't like in jail for not cooperating with her rump committee. We also have a lawsuit pending about Nancy Pelosi's communications with General Milley about Donald Trump. Seditious activity, in my view. Try to undermine the chain of command in a way that is very dangerous to a separation of powers and the presidency and the way our military is run. Dangerous times. Judicial Watch is in federal court for records about that. I'm sure there are a few that I'm missing. Of course, we have other FOIAs and records requests. I know we've asked the Capitol Police for records about the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. They haven't given us any records yet. We may have to sue them again. So that's a 1/6 investigation. So this rump committee is harassing people they don't like politically, while Judicial Watch is doing a serious independent investigation that citizens can rely upon, because it's not just me saying, oh, this is what I think about January 6th. No, what we do is we bring out the documents so people can judge for themselves. You can look at the videos. You can look at the audio. You can look at the emails, the text messages, the memos. That's why they hate Judicial Watch, because they can't really argue with the government documents, because there's truth there, and they hate the truth. The left does. And corrupt government officials do, because, to be clear, this is a Republican and Democratic problem. So, January 6th committee is a threat to our constitutional order. It's an abuse of power. And I don't care if there are Republicans on the committee or Democrats on the committee. When you start taking text messages and start reading them into the record, violating the privacy of individuals, when you start harassing people with subpoenas in retaliation for First Amendment protected speech, remember, they don't want us to criticize the election in 2020. And they're trying to criminalize that. I've been warning you about that since January 6th, even before then. And sure enough, that's what they're doing. If you have a question about the election, you should be subject to investigation. That's third world. But unfortunately, it's America right now. And Judicial Watch is standing fast in terms of figuring out what's going on with January 6th. And believe you me, we're monitoring what Congress is doing very closely as well, and may take additional action there.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.